Good morning. I hope everyone is doing great today. I'll kind of watch you in the chat box. Hi, Christine. Washington State. Hopefully, you're having some good weather up there. This morning, I've already been to an early soccer game for my grandson. It is absolutely hysterical watching 4 and 5 year olds play soccer. It's always a good time. So that was my fun already this morning, and now I'm here with you and glad to be here. So as you are watching and participating in this morning's show, please jump in and say hello in the chat box. It's always good to see your names up there, and especially those that I see from week to week. It's kind of like saying hello to friends, even though I don't spend a ton of time watching that. So anyway, I have some pictures to share with you that were sent to me uh, via my email address, which is on when I'm looking at my computer, it's on my bottom left. And it's divinequilts at Gmail, and you can use that, or please put them on the forum in the quilt show if you can do that. And we also have pictures that you can post, and we hope that you do, in the Saturday sampler. So it's hashtag Dee's Saturday Sampler. So pop in and put those up if you can. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. Here is this one was sent in by Bonnie, and this is an anniversary quilt that she made. It's just beautiful. The colors are absolutely wonderful. I think she matched her bedroom, and she did her own quilting on that. So that's just absolutely lovely. Thank you, Bonnie. She's got a few more here from our work with the Drunkard's Path. And from what I understand, she keeps wanting to try. I think that's what she said. And so here she's working on some blocks and different sizes in that. So again, terrific. And then there is this one. So, there's many different ways you can put them together and make them work for you. So, Bonnie, thank you for sending those in. And what a great, they looked absolutely fantastic. So, good job on that. And then I want to tell those of you who are coming on that, oh, Bonnie says I gave you the wrong picture. Well, okay. Sorry about that. And not your anniversary quilt. Well, it's a quilt and it's beautiful. And whether I got that wrong or not, I apologize to you very much so, Bonnie, but it's absolutely beautiful. And then I want to let you know that there's only a few quilt kits for the quilt that we're doing today that we're starting. It's the autumn quilt, and this is it. And so we're going to be starting here on this quilt. We'll be finished before Halloween on this one. So if you really want a kit for it, the fabric is lovely. I have it here. We'll get to see a little bit more of that today. Please jump in the store and grab that. They also, in the plaid fabric, which I think is going to be just, it's like this, and it's going to be lovely in terms of a backing, and they have some yardage of that. So again, if you're thinking that you might like that for a backing, again, it's a good thing today to get into the store. Jump into the store and get that. And I believe that Kristen will give some links to the store and stuff as we go. And then as we're working on this, we have some applique coming up, and you're going to get choices and what you're going to, what you want to do with the applique. And for those who want to go raw edge applique, I want to share the Select Apple Stick from Floriani. And that what makes this a good product, and it comes in both this 8.5 by 11 sheet as well as a roll, is that once you put it on to your fabric, you can remove the paper and place it on your fabric and continue to move it until you have it placed as you want to, and it comes right off of that. And once you get it in place where you want that applique to be, then you can go ahead and press it and put it on. It's permanent then. And so if you want to do raw edge, that's definitely what you need. If you want to go a little bit more traditional and do hand applique, turned applique, then we'll work on that at that time when that pops in for us. All right, so I want to talk about the pattern. I do want to talk a little bit about, some of the basics of quilting, at least my version of that. So here is the quilt pattern. And with the pattern, if you bought the kit, you're going to get a supplement. Excuse me. And what this supplement is for is that the original fabrics that were used in the quilt were not all still available, and so there were some substitutions made of the fabrics. So in here on your left side is the fabric that was in the original pattern, and over here are the substitutions that we made for fabrics that we could get at this point. And so I had mentioned this, I believe, last week. And what I think would be a good idea is to go into your pattern, and where it gives you the list of, what the fabrics were, if there's a substitution, put that out there, write it in on the side. I haven't done that yet, quite yet here. But for example, where it says orange text, then you would write in Mystery Man or Spooky in invites, and it's a pumpkin. And so you would put that there instead. So I would suggest that so there isn't a ton of confusion. And then I want to go to the general instructions. And the first thing that I want to point out to you is always read all instructions before beginning. That is always a great idea because there's always some surprises in there. And just like with most fabrics and patterns, I found a few surprises. And so the measurements and the templates for some of the blocks include the 1/4 inch seam. And not to be confused, you go down to the instructions are included for raw edge fusible applique. So you're going to need, these do not come with seam allowance, obviously. So if you're going to do the needle turn or starch method or some other form of applique, you're going to have to add that extra allowance in your applique technique. All right. And then in this paragraph, it tells you the reverse image. So pay attention to that. And you're gonna draw around different shapes, and then you're gonna use the reverse applique on a few of the blocks. Make sure that when we get there, and of course I will talk about this, and when we get to that point of applique. And I just looked up and I saw that Sonia is asking, is the pattern only available? Absolutely. So if you have not gotten the pattern yet and you would like to follow along using your own fabrics, perfect. Jump in the store and you can pick up the pattern. And so then it talks about the stems, and we'll get into all of that when we get to that point. And so the next thing I want to point out is they go through each one of the fabrics and they tell you what to cut. And this pattern is cutting strips from your yardage. And then from those strips that you cut, you're going to be doing some subcutting. And you know, there's different ways of tackling this, and I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to go ahead and cut everything at the beginning. And on some of these, like the black snap dots over here, and the black solids and the white solids, that you go to your templates and you put out the templates, and they give instructions on how to place them on your fabric so that you make the best use of your fabric, as well as getting it correctly and making sure that you don't have you're not coming up short on the fabric from your kit. I am choosing, because I have a smaller room that I'm working in, and I've got a couple of other projects going, so I've got things kind of everywhere, and I'm sure that there's a few of you that can relate to, to that you got stuff kind of a little bit everywhere. So I am going to cut only as I go, and sometimes that has worked better for me, and I tend to do that because I have cut all of my fabric and then realized that there was a mistake in the pattern, and I didn't have enough fabric to keep going and to continue. So I did read carefully through all of the instructions on the cutting, and some things that I noticed is that it's all cut in strips. And so that's going to make this a little bit easier in some circumstances. And in the pattern as well, they give instructions on flying geese and half square triangles. We're going to get into half square triangles today in our block that we're going to be making. And I'll show you traditional. I'll show you ways that I like to do it, sometimes for ease and speed. And I'm sure that you have your methods that you love and that type of thing. So bear with me as we go through this, and I will share some of my insights with you as we go. So we're going to be making the churn dash, and as I said, I'm going to cut each block from the fabric as I need it. And to the right of that, it's the name of the fabric. And today we're going to be working, we're only going to make one of the blocks. So we're going to be working with the substitution for the polka dots with these little triangles. And so we have 2 fabrics for each of the blocks. And we're also going to you will also, before next week, make a block that is out of the orange spooky material and of the gray. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about cutting. So I cut the strips that I was going to need for today's project. And as I was looking at this, this is the Riley White Solid. It says that I am going to need, from what I have cut, 2 C squares, 1 D square, and 4 E rectangles. So I went back to my cutting chart and I looked for those, strips and where they were and how to cut them. What I noticed is that I'm making 3 blocks, and each of these blocks will finish at 3 inches, so they need to be cut at 3.5. And so the center of my churn dash is 3.5. These sewn together are 3.5. My half square triangle sewn together are 3.5 before they're sewn in, which will make them 3 inches. And so the only place that I saw 3.5 squares was from the strip that I cut at 4.5. So I am going to be taking my 3.5 inch blocks out of that 4.5 inch strip. So as you read through that, you're going to have to keep going back and looking and double checking, because it's not going to necessarily be the exact measurement of the strip you cut, because it was the only one that I found here and that had 3 in it. So I've labeled everything as I cut it. I think you're going to need to do that, or it's going to get very confusing, for you, and it's going to take you more time to figure out where you go next. So I have my 2.5 inch strip, I have a 4 inch strip, I have a 4.5 inch strip, and then I have a 4 inch strip here. And from those strips that I now will put aside for the moment, I have cut what I needed for my block. So as I'm cutting strips, you're going to get, and it says from width of fabric, so from selvage to selvage. And generally speaking, I like to use my 12-inch by 6-inch ruler to do that. I want to talk a little bit about when you fold the fabric up and it's along this bottom as you are creating your side of it. You're cutting it straight, and I'm losing the word. So I square up, that's the word I was looking for, squaring up. So as I square up my fabric, I am going to use my mat. It's the only time I really use my mat. And I want to make sure that fold is directly on that line. All right, at the bottom. Now, I need to take my fingers and go along this, because at some times it gets wrinkled or it moves in there, and I don't want it to. So if it does, I usually take my ruler and I will make sure that it's, pressed down nice and flat. I'll straighten it back up. I'll get it over so that I can, square up the side of my fabric. And what I will do, and hopefully I will remember to tell you all the reasons that I do this. So if I'm going to square up this piece of fabric, I really don't look at this line over here or lay my ruler so that it lines up here. Because what happens is this 1/8 of an inch of plastic and the curve of our eye, it's not quite always the same at the top, or it doesn't look that way. So I come out here 1 inch of a way from my fabric, and I line it up here, and then I cut. And there's something that I want to also say about the cutting on the and I'm not going to really cut because I already have this. But sometimes with our rulers and our rotary cutters, we push the fabric. It starts to push, and we'll get a little bit of that rainbow. And one of the things that helps me keep from getting a rainbow in there is if I start in the fabric, come back, and without cutting, it's slipped, come back and then go forward. And that keeps this nice and flat, and it gives you an accurate cut without that rainbow effect on your fabric. All right. So I have my 4.5-inch squares that I'm going to make my half square triangles out of. I have my 3.5-inch square. I have 4 of my rectangles, and I have 4 of the others so that I can make my block. And the traditional way of doing a half square triangle, and I say traditional, I don't know that it's traditional, but it's the way many of us, learned to oversize a block, and you can still do that. Instead of, cutting it directly at 4.5, you could cut it, maybe 4 3/4 or something. Give yourself a little extra room so that you could trim it down. I went ahead and drew lines. And what you do to get those lines is you put your 1/4 inch line, and I would use a larger ruler. I'm using a smaller one simply because of the space that I have here. And you would line up your 1/4 inch on this point, and that 1/4 inch would be lined up on this point, and you're going to draw your line. And then you would turn it around and do the same thing with that. Now, the question always came for me, because at first when I was doing this, I would find that, do I sew here right directly on the line or a little bit over? And I had to learn a little bit of my machine to really figure that out. And I kept measuring, and I would suggest that you do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this, and I'll sew the other one, but I'm not going to mark it. I'm going to use this wonderful little pad. So right sides together. I'm going to, prep both of these blocks. And then I have one of these Sew Steady mats on my machine base here. And here is my sewing line that I have lined up with my needle. And then on either side, I have my 1/4 inch seam. So to create my first seam, I am going to put this point on that 1/4 inch and take it in. All right. And when this comes up, sometimes I'll put a piece of tape. They have that 1/4 inch tape that will come out. But I can usually get a few stitches in before I have to do that. And the Sew Steady mat comes in 2 sizes, so the bigger size actually will go off of that. So then I'm going to start sewing. And I want to, I don't think it's in the camera yet. So let me get it into the camera, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. All right, so it's still not there. All right, we're getting there. So I have my point right here, and it's on that 1/4 inch mark. And so as I guide it through, I'm keeping that point right there on that 1/4 inch line. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I want that point. Let me get this completely straight. And sometimes a pin in there works really good. So with this mat, I don't really have to do any marking if I choose not to. And for that, I really like this Sew Steady mat. Saves me a lot of time instead of doing the marking, and I really do appreciate that. All right. So now I have my two pieces that are, let me move my fabric out of the way. And I'm going to cut down the center of this. Most of the time I just do it. I don't necessarily and see, I didn't even measure that well on that one. But I live dangerously. And I cut down the center of that. Now I'm going to press it. And I want to talk a little bit about the pressing of this. I want to sink my threads because the thread does take up space, and if you put the heat to it, it will sink into the fabric. And I want to just touch the seam line with the side of my iron so that it's nice and flat. And then I'm just going to let it sit there for a second or two. And I don't have any of the wrinkles or folds in there at all because I did sink my threads. I hit the side of the seam without stretching my fabric. And I certainly don't pull on this when I'm doing that. Because it's real easy to get, as we're, sawing back and forth or doing the ironing thing, to get this to almost bow and curve. And I really don't want that to happen. So I, carefully just hold it back, let the side of the iron do its thing, hold it down. And now I have my 4 half square triangles. So the next thing that I need to sew, and I probably would have done these at the same time I was doing my half square triangle and just keep feeding them into my machine for, speed. And I would have had all 3 of my pieces cut. And, I ironed this, but the wrinkle looks like it kind of came back before I cut it. And that is, if your fabric is wrinkled and you're getting ready to cut it, make sure that you press it to get those wrinkles out. So I'm going to chain piece these. Again, right sides together. And we'll take a look at the half square triangles in just a minute because we want them to be at 3.5 inches. And what's really interesting is depending on the ruler I use and how I cut it and where I sew, if I draw lines, where I sew on the lines, it makes a difference with my 1/4 inch seam. So I've taken the time to measure and see if I need, with my machine and the way I sew, if I need to press it or cut it, sew it, whichever method, whichever thing that I'm doing, is if I need to cut it or sew it, inside the line, outside the line, directly on the line. And I do recommend that. All right, so now I've sewn each of these together, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to set my seam. I'm going to press. And because I'm using white fabric, I'm going to press to the dark side. All right. Now I'm going to set up my block after I've measured these to make sure. And as I'm using my ruler to do this, I want to put my 45-degree angle down the center of my block. And I can trim off just a little bit on each one of these as they're coming out. I don't usually do this sitting down, so it feels a little bit awkward. I turn it. Oh, apologies for that. So my 45 degree angle is completely down the center, and now that I've trimmed one side of that, I've got my 3.5 here and my 3.5 inch line on this side, and I want to make sure, and I don't know how well you can see this on camera, but I have laid the broken line right up against my fabric at the 3.5 inch line because I have measured a number of times, and I will get a true 3.5 if I keep it that way. All right. So let's just get these all trimmed. So the first 3.5 that I do, I'm going to let just a little bit around the edges. And I'm so thankful that these rulers are such that they are, because they don't move, and me sitting down makes it a little bit more awkward. So again, my 3.5 goes down in that corner. I'm laying my, my broken line right next to my fabric, making sure that that line is right there in the seam allowance. And so I'm just shaving off a tiny bit from this 4.5 to get my 3.5 inch block. And it goes pretty quick. And normally, if you want it to be completely perfect, you would cut it at 3 7, to get a 3.5 block. They're usually, you add 7/8 inch to a finished size. So you're given just a tad bit extra here, which is a good thing. All right. Okie doke. The trash. All right, now I want to get my block set up. So the top left goes in, top right goes in. I get my 3.5 inch square in the center. I have, the dark fabric coming in. That way, I've thought about it now as I'm putting, this down, and I won't have to think about it as I'm picking it up to sew. All right, so now there's my block ready for sewing. And so I'm going to sew, and this is just simply how I do it. You can, change it from left to right or right to left. That's up to you. But I'm going to flip this over and get it set up. And it will go under my machine. I'm going to get that lined up and make sure it's lined up in the center. And of course, use pins if it's not fitting in exactly. So now I'm going to pick up my solid white block and flip it over onto these two and make sure that that corner is in there the way it needs to be. And now if I had pinned it, they would be in place already. Adjust that, make sure I sew it. And again, I'm flipping this one over top of the bottom left corner. And this is, a fun, easy block to do. I like the churn dash. It adds a lot to a lot of different quilts. And I also want to point out something right here with my finger. I will move my hand out of the way, but I will keep my finger or my hand on the side of this so that I get a true 1/4 inch at the end, that it doesn't go off, veer off to the right or veer off to the left, depending on what my machine does, and guide it all the way through. Now I'm going to only cut the first block that I sewed off. This helps keep me in order. And with this, I'm, gonna press these to the outside, and right now it's going to be the easiest for me to do. So I am setting my seam, I'm touching the side, and I have not changed my camera because you've already seen me press. Okay. All right, so I press that out a little bit, and now I'm going to pick the top one up, flip it to the right, or left, excuse me, get it lined up, snip the next one, and again press my seam, touch it there, and now I'm going to pick my center one up, get it lined up, get a few stitches in, and then because I'm only working with 3 inches, if I was working, with more than that, I'd probably put a pin in because I don't want to go that far. So again, set my seam, flatten my seam with the side of my iron, let it sit for a few seconds, and now I'm going to flip the other one over. All right. Then I took the first one off, set my seam. I'm gonna press this. Just give it a good overall press. And now I'm gonna snip off my center. And because these are going out, I want my centers to go in so that I can butt my seams up against each other. And so setting my seam. And now I'm going to share with you my pinning method on this. So now I'm going to butt these seams up against each other so that they're catching in there. And if you just push your finger along there, you can feel it catch. Generally speaking, you know you're told to pin on both sides. Well, I want to get this done faster, and I don't want to take my pins out sooner, because what would happen is that it would move and I wouldn't quite have them together. So I started pinning 1/8 of an inch to the right of the seam, coming up about 1/8 of an inch to the left of the seam. Don't know if you can see that completely. So now I'm going to go over here, get these butted up, and do exactly the same thing. 1/8 of an inch to the right, coming up about 1/8 of an inch to the left. And going to put this, and I want to show you what I especially like about this method of pinning for me, is that when I get to this point, I can actually stitch right up to the seam and actually go over one stitch over that seam before I have to pull my pin, without me hitting my pin and without it moving. So I just slow down, go one stitch over the seam line, and when I open that, there was no movement in that at all. And so because this kind of wants to go upward, although I think it's going to be better for me to press it down, just so that it lays a little bit flatter in the back. You can also open these seam lines by twisting them. I don't think I'm going to. So I want to set my seam all the way down. Just hit that side. And just get it nice and pressed. And then, get this one pressed, and I would sew that and pin it to the bottom. I don't know that I, need to take up your time to do that right at the moment, but let me see if I have any questions here. Nancy, I'm not sure. I need to go back up and Okay. The foot that I'm using is a 97D on the Bernina 770 is what I sew with. And I would agree, Terry, that I've not been disappointed with any of the Quilter Select rulers, cutters, materials, any of it. Uh, yes, it is a dual feed quilter's foot. I love it. It makes all the difference in the world to have that dual feed. And um, okay, I think I answered those questions. Okay, thank you. So this is class number 1. So for next week, if you would finish all 3 blocks, do your cutting however you would like to do it. If you want to do it all at once, get it all out there, lay it out. Do label it. I think that will save you a lot of angst along the way if you label it, if you cut it all at once. Um, you're still going to need to label it if you cut block by block, because you're going to be cutting strips and you're not going to use the whole strip with each of the blocks. So I have space enough that I can, have the strips set out as I go and use them. And so we'll do that. And then next week we're going to be working on the maple leaf, which is fun. Um, and look forward to that. And we'll just keep going. We'll get this done before Halloween, and I am so excited about getting to start the quilt this week. And so we'll see you next week, and have an absolute wonderful one.